This fabric is going to make a fabulous backing for my next quilt of valor. Just got home from the quilt store and it goes straight in the wash, right? Well, that's a choice we all have to make. So let's talk about it. Do you pre-wash? I see three major considerations for this topic, and let's address each one. The first is the issue of shrinkage, and this can be a major factor for your final results, because if you are mixing fabric from your stash with brand new fabric, and let's say you've washed some of the fabric and other pieces have not been washed, they have some shrinkage. The washing of the fabric shrinks those cotton fibers. So your fabrics may not match up, and it may cause additional puckering when you wash the finished quilt, because that fresh fabric that's never been washed is going to shrink at a different rate than the other fabrics that were pre-washed. So it can be kind of a tricky option there. If, like me, you can't remember what stuff was washed and what wasn't, or just dedicate yourself to pre-washing all your fabric and then you won't have that concern. You also have that issue with the back of the quilt. And that is why in the beginning of the video, you saw me choose not to wash that patriotic fabric, because I used a set of pre-cuts for the top that I did not pre-wash. So if I wash the back and didn't wash any of the fabric on the front, I'm gonna run into some extra puckering. Now, we all enjoy that crinkle look of a washed quilt, and it really feels cozy and cuddly when it's got that extra texture from washing and how the fabric kind of bunches up around the stitches. I just didn't want to cause any problems with the front and the back shrinking at different rates. So I will throw the finished quilt in the wash at the end, and that way I know everything at least gets the same treatment. Whether it still shrinks at different rates, we'll have to see. Now, besides the issue of shrinkage, we have the concern of bleeding, the colors bleeding and the dye in the fabric being released and impacting the coloring of other areas of the quilt, notably whites. We've all had that horror story of throwing a brand new red sweatshirt in the wash with some older t-shirts, and now we have a lovely pink wardrobe that we weren't really going for. And that can be heartbreaking when it happens to a quilt. And so that would be a very strong argument in favor of pre-washing. Unfortunately, I'm a lazy quilter. I don't want to take the time to wash the quilt, which is actually the third piece I was going to mention, was the time factor. But sticking to that point of dye bleed, fabrics these days are pretty stable, and the processing has become very steady, and commercial fabrics don't bleed quite as much in modern era as maybe generations past. But you still run into trouble with those striking colors, those reds, those purple batiks, especially because they do have a little bit different dye process than other printed fabrics. So results may vary, and you may want to be extra careful. Another issue that we have with pre-washing is the popularity of pre-cuts. One of the reasons why people do not wash their fabric before sewing with it is that it ravels, the edges ravel, you get those big clumps of thread in your washing machine that may lead to costly repairs, and nobody has time for that. So especially with pre-cuts, it would be very hard to take a set of 2.5-inch strips and throw them in the washing machines. They'd end up a tangled mess. Now, you can alleviate some of that with a lingerie bag. Just throw the pre-cuts in a lingerie bag and throw them in the wash, and you should at least contain some of that mess and reduce the chance of tangling and knots, and perhaps some of the fraying. I've also heard a trick of snipping the corner of your yardage, and you won't end up with so much of the thread raveling as you may otherwise happen on those cut edges of your fabric when you wash them. Also with pre-cuts, charm squares, layer cakes, that kind of thing, I sometimes just fill the sink with some soapy water and let my pre-cut soak in that. It'll release some of the dye. You know, you can rinse, and when the water runs clear, of course, you should be good to go. And that really works for me, is if I'm concerned about potential bleeding with my quilt fabric, the dye running off some of those brighter colors, I will just soak the fabric. And that helps with the pre-cut issue rather than throwing everything in the washing machine. And I mentioned time being a factor, that, you know, I just want to spend my free time sewing. I don't want to have to wait for a load of laundry to finish and then go through the dryer and then have to iron everything. But, you know, sometimes for the best results, we do want to prepare things in the best way possible. But I have to say that from my earliest days of quilting, when I worked in my mom's fabric store and we would get this gorgeous fabric in, and I would just grab it off the shelf, cut it, and start sewing, I have made most of my quilts without pre-washing, and for the majority of the time, it has turned out just fine. So I am not going to judge you whether you pre-wash or don't pre-wash. It's a matter of individual choice, but I just want you to understand the reasoning behind both sides of the argument. And another really good consideration that someone brought up was that there may be chemicals used in the manufacturing process that you don't want on your skin or in your home, and so it's very important to pre-wash there. So again, use the knowledge and decide what is best for you. If you need to get rid of some of those chemicals and the manufacturing process, or even just the dust of everyday life, it may be a good idea to wash that all off before you use your fabric in your quilt. And on the flip side, again, being able to just start with that yardage and cut and sew is the idea of that nice crisp fabric coming off the bolt. Of course, if you wash your fabric, now you've washed away all of that sizing, and that's where starch comes in. And that is a topic for another video, is whether you starch your fabric as you press it, as you go, whether you use the commercial starch or a homemade version or best press, or there's so many options. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue of pre-washing. And here is what I mean by the dangers of not pre-washing your fabric. I made this quilt years ago, and you can see lovely selection of black and white fabrics with these bright batiks. And there's that bad guy, that red batik ended up bleeding. I realized that I had not pre-washed this quilt. It was in our camper van for a long time, so I brought it in, and even without really thinking about it, I threw it in the wash. And some of these fabrics just kind of look a little bit dingy now, kind of gray, obviously, with some of that black bleeding. And then there's at least one spot you can see the discoloration where it kind of brushed up against that red fabric and there was some bleeding. But again, this is a quilt that is going to stay in our camper. It still serves the purpose of keeping us warm on those cool nights in the mountains, and I love it just as much with its flaws as I did before, because done is better than perfect, and we want to use our quilts. And I hope the quilt police don't come after me too bad for my habit of not pre-washing, but we'll see lovely results no matter what. So I hope you enjoy your day quilting and have fun along the way.